Euthanasia for those who are mentally ill? To me, it sounds like something straight out of a Eugenics 101 playbook, but to Canada's Liberal government, medical assistance in dying, aka MAID, for those who have mental disorders is a human right that must be restored. I'm Drea Humphrey with Rebel News, standing in front of Langley, British Columbia's Academy Farms Market, where on July 9th, Cloverdale Langley, BC Member of Parliament Tamara Jansen held a press conference about her private member's bill, which seeks to amend the criminal code to disallow mental health from being a reason one can be offered or receive MAID.
Mental illness is treatable. Expanding assisted suicide to people suffering from mental disorders will result in premature and wrongful deaths of Canadians who could have recovered. Bill C-218, the Right to Recover Bill, will ensure the safety of all Canadians suffering from mental illness.
London South MP Andrew Lawton. Both MPs were here today raising awareness about the importance of the bill during a time when many Canadians still don't even realize that in 2027, Canada is scheduled to become a country that uses your tax dollars to end the lives of people wanting MAID solely for mental health reasons that are deemed to be grievous and irremediable. Jansen, Lawton, a former judge who's also the former Lieutenant Governor of New Brunswick and a First Nations advocate, Graydon Nicholas, as well as Alicia Duncan, a life advocate who has disturbing reason to believe that her own mother was euthanized in Canada unlawfully, all disagree with Canada's radical plans to expand MAID and instead believe the focus should be on recovery. And here's why.
So imagine someone suffering from trauma, PTSD, depression, or just feeling completely hopeless. They could walk into a hospital, ask for help, and instead be offered MAID. Now that's the law in Canada right now, although it's currently on hold until March 2027. Now most Canadians that I talk to find that completely unbelievable. They say to me, there's no way that's true. But unfortunately, it is true. These are proof that Canada's MAID regime is putting people in danger, offering death when people are really what they're asking for is dignity, support, and a chance to recover.
My name is Andrew Lawton. I'm the Member of Parliament for Elgin, St. Thomas, London South in Ontario, and I am also a suicide survivor. 15 years ago, I very nearly succeeded in ending my life to suicide. I had an intentional overdose and was in the hospital on life support and in a coma for several weeks. This was the culmination of what had been a years-long battle with mental illness, and one that I very nearly lost. Now, I want to share a few things that are important for context here, in that suicide is something that if someone is inclined to do it, and they share this with a medical practitioner, it activates a responsibility, a legal and ethical responsibility to treat that person.
My name is Alicia Duncan, and today I'm here to share my mom's story and my family's story about the horrific outcome of what can happen when we allow poorly legislated laws around medical assistance in dying. In February of 2020, my mom was in a minor car accident. My young daughter was in the car at the time, and she was completely fine. However, my mom was diagnosed with a concussion, and 3 weeks later, we went into COVID lockdown. It was very difficult for my mom to access care at the time, and over the next 20 months, her health slowly deteriorated. She began losing weight. The doctors were unable to determine what the cause could be. They ruled out everything from cancer to fibromyalgia. It was 2 days before my mom's scheduled medical assistance in dying that she let us know that she would be dead in less than 48 hours. And my sister and I, knowing that she had no terminal diagnosis, no diagnosis other than depression, that something was very wrong. And we believed that we could stop this because surely the law would protect someone like my mom in a mental health crisis. And so we went to the police, and the police told us that there was nothing we could do they could do because all of the paperwork was in place.
I've been involved in, as a provincial court judge, of course, dealing with people who had mental health problems that appeared in front of the court. Many of them, of course, are assessed or sent to institutions and then evaluated and eventually are released. But also in my own community that I'm from, Tobic First Nation, I was involved in this suicide prevention study that was done in New Brunswick. And I teach at university, and I was reluctant to get involved because I'm not a representative voice. So they said, okay, we need you. So I said, okay, we need more of our Indigenous communities in New Brunswick to explain what's happening in our communities with the loss of life.
This bill would put an end to MAID for solely mental illness. Now, MAID for mental illness doesn't protect the vulnerable. It targets them. It reaches people not when they're stable, but when they're at their lowest. And they're in crisis, isolated, without enough support. So we're here because with mental illness, recovery and hope is possible. People can get better. And Canadians struggling with their mental health deserve care and support, not a state-sanctioned path to death.
One of the gravest issues with the laws that are set to go into effect in 2027 is the lack of differentiation between someone with suicidal ideation who needs to be stopped and supported versus someone who walks into a medical office and seeks MAID as a service because of their mental illness. And that is one of the most important things that needs to be addressed in this.
We were outraged and we could not believe that this was happening. And they told us that in order for us to stop this, we would need a court order. And so we went to the provincial courthouse and we pled for my mom's life in an emergency hearing. And thankfully, the judge granted us a warrant for my mom's arrest under the Mental Health Act. Sadly, my mom, who was suffering from suicidal ideation, attempted to take her own life, and she ended up being sectioned, ironically, in the psychiatric unit that she used to manage as a psychiatric nurse.
Now, as an Indigenous person and also as a Catholic, of course, I was brought up with the values that life begins at the moment of conception and death comes in its natural end. And the suicide rate is the highest in First Nation communities, Indigenous communities actually across this country. It's shocking. And when I was asked first to participate in the original bill of Bill C-14 against MAID, I went there to testify and indicated that this was wrong.
Mental illness is treatable. Expanding assisted suicide to people suffering from mental disorders will result in premature and wrongful deaths of Canadians who could have recovered. Bill C-218, the Right to Recover Bill, will ensure the safety of all Canadians suffering from mental illness.
At the end of the day, people who went through what I went through 15 years ago believe that their life cannot get better. They believe that there is no hope, that there's no chance of happiness, no chance of success. I never would have believed at my lowest point in 2010 that I could be standing here today as a member of parliament, as a husband, as someone that has a life that I'm so happy with. And all of that was only possible because I was given the support and care that I needed to go through what I did and come out the other side. The message that I share with anyone who's struggling with mental illness is that I got better. And no matter how difficult and how painful it is to be living with mental illness, to be living with the desire in some cases to end your life, there is hope. And it's incumbent upon all of us as a society, as a community, the healthcare field, the government, to keep hope alive, to ensure that patients, that people struggling have a right to recover. And that's what this bill does.
Drea Humphrey with Rebel News. The Benelux countries, as far as I know, are the only jurisdictions that are offering, aside from Quebec, which I just learned, MAID for people with mental health. Is there anything that stands out to you since their rollout that proves as an example of why we shouldn't continue with this?
Well, Andrew maybe can speak to it as well, but I actually think we have plenty enough examples here in Canada. I think already we have seen so many apparent abuses that have not been tackled in any way, shape, or form. We just, unfortunately, they can only be brought out in the media. And as Alicia mentioned, there have been no charges laid. From what I can see, we have plenty enough evidence right here in Canada that we should not be continuing. But Andrew, did you want to speak to that?
We have to look at the way that the expansion of MAID in Canada has been viewed around the world and condemned by the United Nations, by other countries, and even countries that have what we would view as traditionally more relaxed restrictions or regulations around MAID have still looked at Canada as an example of where not to go with it. And I think this expansion of MAID to people with mental illness is really the line that even a lot of people in Canada who may be fundamentally supportive of MAID view as being a bridge too far. And I think we need to rally around the idea that there is very broad consensus for this among Canadians, among a lot of Canadian stakeholder groups, and that the rest of the world is watching. And I think Canada needs to do the right thing and pass Bill C-218.
MP Tamara Jensen, why was it important to bring forth this bill?
Well, I think we're very concerned about the implementation of the law, which is in place right now in March 2027, to allow for people solely with a mental illness to access MAID. We are worried that we are going to lose Canadians that could have recovered. And so that's why we bring this bill forward, to really remind people you do have a right to recover bill C-218, sorry.
So then what do you say to the argument for supporters of this expansion that this isn't about suicide, this is about restoring rights to people who have a mental illness but understand the consequence? That's what I'm hearing is the argument.
The only argument that I've heard in support of this is people believing that there will be safeguards in place to prevent people like me from getting MAID. And those safeguards don't actually exist. And we've heard quite the opposite from a lot of medical stakeholders, that there is going to be a very high margin of error in this because it's so difficult to distinguish between someone who the system needs to step in to protect because they want to end their life and someone who's making a request within the confines of the law for MAID because of their mental illness. And I think that we need to listen to those experts who are saying this is not something that we can easily achieve. And a lot of people who have supported this expansion are really just putting too much trust and faith in a system that isn't set up to deal with this.
Now, you have a lot of concerns when it comes to Indigenous people and the concerns that you think this expansion could have on them. Could you explain that a little bit?
Well, first of all, I guess our people were never really involved or consulted about when MAID originally was introduced in 2016 and the law was passed. But I was asked to go there and speak against it, which I did. I'm not sure, I don't think I made any impact on the members of parliament who were there, but the law passed. And even later on, when they tried to make changes as well for those who had suicidal tendencies, I spoke out against that as well. And I've been making presentations with the public on our own campus last fall. Another psychiatrist, a friend of mine from Ottawa, we spoke against it on campus. And then what was interesting about that is, when you're on a university campus, you've got freedom of differences and all that. You've got what they call academic freedom. But one of my colleagues who went there was actually in favor of MAID. And when she heard our presentation, she said, no, this is wrong. This should not happen. And then I've also been speaking at this, like with the CWL and a couple other people, to let them know what's happening, and especially about the shocking things that have taken place in Quebec. So that's been to have Indigenous people not commit suicide, to have Indigenous people restore their lives and purpose for life. That's what I advocate now.
Well, I think the most important thing is to ensure that those who are suffering can get help. That's honestly, that is the real problem that we have right now, where our services are lacking. And so unfortunately we're leading people down a path that could end their lives. So for me, this bill, the most important thing is you have the right to recover, and so we need to demand that we get the services needed in place rather than issuing a MAID?
Whenever I've spoken to people who support this expansion, oftentimes they have too much faith in a system that's not set up to deal with this. They believe there are going to be all of these safeguards that will prevent someone going through what I went through 15 years ago from accessing MAID. And I would say listen to the experts who have said you cannot easily distinguish between someone who is seeking MAID within the parameters of the system as it's designed and someone who actually is desiring to end their life as a symptom of their mental illness. And that's someone that we need to step in to treat. So I think listening to the experts there who are warning us that there is going to be a huge margin of error if we go through with this is really important.
There's barely anyone doing this in the world. There's already been 2 delays. Why do you think the Liberals really want to put this forth, even though there's division in the medical community over it?
I must say I don't exactly understand their thought process, but I do believe we could see with the first time that this bill was put forward that we're beginning to really explore the impact of allowing MAID for solely a mental illness. And you could see that, we were gaining momentum. We almost got it passed. And I believe if we continue to have the discussion and continue to actually interact with the different communities and understand the impact this has on them, I believe we can get full support for the bill.
Something that stood out to me when you were speaking was you said you think you would have been or signed up to get MAID because of the way that you thought. Could you explain that a little bit further?
A lot of people have the misbelief, I would say, that suicide is always rash or impulsive. We know that there are a lot of people, like in my own case, where it was a very deliberate, calculated, and maybe not rational, but rationalized decision. And I know that I'm a good debater. I would have advocated for myself within the system and made a pretty good argument for why I believed that suicide was the answer. And as we heard from Alicia Duncan as well, her mother was a psychiatric nurse. She knew full well what the right things to say were to go through this. And I think that's something we need to be very mindful of, people that know how to game the system. And these are people that still more than ever need to be supported to no longer want to end their lives.
Now, I like that you're saying this is about recovery, but there are some people who do feel hopeless in their mental illness. They feel like they've tried everything and maybe they really want this legislation. What do you think the government should be doing more of, or something new as an alternative for people like that?
Well, I think actually, if you go to the testimony that's been put forward at committee, it's very clear that there is no scientific test that would be able to state whether or not someone cannot recover. So I think it's very important that we, instead of giving into hopelessness and allowing someone with a mental illness to go down that path, as Andrew said, we actually offer them support and hope and tell them your life really is important to us. We want to help.
Yeah, and here you are standing as an MP, but still there are people who do feel like they can't recover. They feel like they've tried everything. What do you think the government needs to do as an alternative in this situation?
I don't pretend to have the magic wand, but I do think one crucial part of it is to highlight the stories of people that have come through this and saw the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, I never imagined at my darkest moments that I would have the wife that I do, who's so wonderful, and this loving family and a great network of friends, and to be a member of Parliament, to actually get to influence policy and all of these things. And this wouldn't have been possible if I had ended my life. And I needed to access treatments and supports, and it was a long battle, but it was so worth it. So we need to highlight that mental illness is not a life sentence. We also, of course, need to make sure that we have supports available for people, that the barriers that stand between folks and getting care are broken down. And that's key as well, but at the very least, we need to make sure that we keep them alive long enough to get care, and that's why passing Bill C-218 is so important.
Now, for those who want to get behind the bill, and for those watching, tell us where the bill is at right now and what they can do if they want to help move it forward.
Okay, so the bill, the Right to Recover Bill 218, was tabled on the final day of Parliament. And now what will happen is the first debate will probably occur end of November, beginning of December. So there'll be a bit of debate back and forth, and then hopefully we can get it, pass it, so that we can get it to committee and have further discussion, talking to all the different communities that this impacts and give them an opportunity to really share that. And I think the most important thing is, for people that are watching, please let your member of Parliament know and senators as well. This is going to end up at the Senate hopefully as well. Let them know that you support this bill. You want people to know they have a right to recover.
This is not a partisan issue. I mentioned in my remarks that when this came up previously, there were some Liberals that voted for it. All of the Conservatives did, all of the New Democrats and Greens did. People need to reach out to their members of Parliament. People need to actually make sure they're having these conversations, and I want to see cross-party support for this.
It's not the Canada that I know. Now, according to Angus Reid, 70% of Canadians are worried about the expansion of MAID for mental illness, and rightly so. The Liberal government's own expert panel couldn't even agree on how to accurately predict if someone with a mental illness wouldn't recover. And psychiatric professionals have said over and over again that recovery is possible. So why are we making death an option for people we know could recover? Mental illness can be overwhelming, but it is not hopeless. There are thousands of Canadians alive today because someone believed in them. Someone gave them time, treatment, a second chance. And that's what this bill is about, giving people that second chance.
If you agree with what you just heard about this bill and want to support it, you can find a link to do so in the written article for this report in the description below. And if you haven't already, you can also sign and share our petition at helpnotharm.ca.